my check-in is with some really beautiful lilies this morning. They smell so good, and I'm so grateful for them. The Course in Miracles talks about the lilies of forgiveness. I love to plant lilies and have them around. I find that funny. Forgiveness is told that it's the way to happiness, in that course at least. Resentment blocks us from love and light. So anyway, if you're here first, I just want to say thank you. I really appreciate you more than I can say. I feel so blessed this morning. I feel so blessed in general. This journey has been a lot more than I've expected, and through it, I've come to a place where I realize what I really want to do and what I've always really wanted to do, but I'm beginning to have faith that I could do it, which is being a sort of vessel for teaching and for joy and happiness and so much masterful material, not that I've written, but that I've read and absorbed, and allowing it to flow through in a way that helps others and myself be empowered to create the life that we're intended to have here, or that's possible, I should say here. I don't know that I'll get into the intention of the world, but I can get into the nature of it. And I'm combining so many different pieces and beginning to realize that there is something so magical here, but we've taken the magic out of the world. And there's so many key points that matter. So there's something going on in this world that's funny. And I think when you take the different pieces, it becomes so much more clear. We're living in a world of imagination, of consciousness, a dream world, if you will, which isn't that weird. It's pretty obvious, actually, the more you think about everything being vibration and really only becoming solid through our senses as we process it. And Alan Watts' view on how we're dicing things up into bits and it's making a mess is really, really an incredibly insightful point. I keep thinking about science these days and how they're starting to splice up DNA and do all this genetic investigation. And I've been so confused because the cutting edge of genetic research is understanding that genes respond based on environment. That's what's been discovered. A cancer gene that's a cancer gene in one person is not necessarily a cancer gene in another person. But when you take that gene out of its environment, and I didn't have words for this specifically, even though I had a sense of it, but until I was studying Alan Watts' take on sort of putting a net over everything and dividing everything up into bits and separating everything and taking everything out of its environment and we think that in order to really evaluate something, it has to be taken out of its environment and we have to be able to repeat testing so it reacts the same way. And that is so wrong. It's important for the purpose of measuring our world and, practical living, but it's not the way nature operates. He has such a key point that way. So if you take the genes out of the environment that they're in and then attempt to test them, this is why things are going awry, because we don't realize that it's the environment that establishes the way that sort of these microbits work. And once you are studying it in a lab, it's the consciousness of the scientist that's studying it, or lack thereof, that impacts how it functions, because it is our consciousness that's driving everything. And that can sound really woo-woo until you get into the fact that everything's vibration anyway. I'm mostly space. How do you explain that? If this was really a physical world and we were in a real physical reality, I'd be made out of some kind of goo. I wouldn't be just space with atoms and electrons that we don't really understand how they work and look exactly like the bodies in space. And like there's something funny going on here. I don't even really exist. It's just mostly space that appears solid. Everything is vibration that's being interpreted and requires an observer in order to be experienced the way that we see it. And that points at a dream world, which goes back to the oldest of teaching, Hinduism and the Vedanta, that this is a dance of Leela and Maya, which is really play and a dream, that God is essentially dreaming here and forgetting himself and just pretending to rediscover itself over and over again. But we've forgotten that it's a game. We've forgotten that it's playful. The Course in Miracles gets deep into that, and especially because we become so ego-centered, which the ego conversation you can find in many different studies. It's big in the Course of Miracles, but obviously Alan Watts Buddhism, I'll go into sort of this separate physical identity we've developed and the freedom that comes when we step outside of that. But when you start to get that there's a piece of consciousness generating the world, that we're creating our reality with our thoughts, it's not that weird when you start to realize everything's vibration, and it's a little weird anyway. So if you start to frame it as a dream world or an illusory world of imagination or consciousness, then of course the way I think impacts my reality and calls something different forth, because we have dreams when we sleep and our own consciousness is generating those dreams. We understand that. And so the way my consciousness changes, my dreams change. If I'm feeling very scared or upset, then I can have nightmares or scary things happen in my dreams. So if this is a little bit of a more solid dream with time in a different way, because when we dream when we sleep, it tends to be a world that sort of lacks time and space in many ways in the structured way that this one does. But consciousness is shared, so we think we're all separate. But if you begin to expand the boundaries of who and what you are, and that there's no real private thoughts, and that we're sort of in a giant soup of consciousness, if you will, then the more of us that agree that something is a flower or a table, then this world becomes more solid and not quite so variable. But it's still quite chaotic when you think about it. And we can see evidence of this being consciousness, and what we focus on grows, that fear can create. Look at COVID. COVID went around the world so quickly. And I was like, this is the first time in the history of the world, probably because of technology, that we're all focusing on the same thing at once. And probably a very large majority of those people were very afraid. I was not. I was really weird that way. I don't know why. I went out and got a job as an essential worker and was around hundreds of people a day and never got COVID. Connection, I don't know. But everyone else was focused all around the world, all different countries, very frightened, and it grew like wildfire. We haven't seen anything spread that quickly around the world. And if you connect it to the fact that everyone was focused on it and afraid of it, it changes the conversation. You can say, wow, that would make a lot of sense. It's the first example really we have of what we focus on grows. And unfortunately, we chose something we were afraid of, and we chose something that wasn't so great. But once we started to take our attention off of it, it stopped spreading. It stopped killing so many people. It stopped becoming such a thing. Now, of course, we think that's because the numbers went down or we had a vaccine or whatever it was, but really we were just looking for an excuse to pull our fear away from it and not focus on it as much. And if we only knew that it was the focus and not the vaccine, not to say that, if you want to get vaccinated or whatever, that's wonderful if it helps people alleviate their fear. And if it helps people be able to move about the world in a better way, then I think that's wonderful. I don't think it should be forced on anyone. I moved about the world and never got COVID and never got a vaccine, and I have no issues. So there would be no reason for me to engage in something like that. But this conversation isn't about that. Whatever helps people feel better. But if we were able to get into full accountability of understanding that it's our minds that are generating the reality, that there's an individual component and a shared component. So we generate for ourselves, and then depending where we vibe, we generate with the world. And so fear is not very powerful in generation, but when you connect millions and millions of people, it becomes very powerful. But if you get into joy, knowledge, freedom, and happiness, one person can shift many, because it's such a powerful emotion. And so that's the goal of where I would like to go with you. So these insights are really expanding my understanding of what reality is, regardless of yours. You don't have to agree with mine, but I'm beginning to realize very intensely that this is a dream imagination world of consciousness, and that isn't that strange or funny, that we believe it to be physical. For some reason that brings us more calm and more assurance, but there isn't any real evidence of that. And we like to think of ourselves as like separate from the environment, or the earth would be better off without us, or this weird hate we have for ourselves. But again, I'll go back to Alan Watts. That's such a great point. And I'll be uploading sort of those 4-part thing from the book that I read, because it's just really impactful to realize that there is no world without the observer. To be blunt, everything here is vibration. So we know this scientifically. So it requires someone with sense organs like sight, taste, smell, touch to interpret it, to experience it in this way, at least. And so we are so integrated with each other and with our environment. And if we could get that accountability and get that level of empowerment, I think everyone would get a lot busier being happier, because happy is what generates a happy dream. Happy people generate a happy dream. Happy thoughts generate happy people. And so becoming happy, much to my surprise, has become the single most important, or I've discovered, I should say, it is the single most important thing any of us could be doing. And running around like crazy people, attempting to collect stuff that we're just gonna leave here when we die, is really neither here nor there. If you want it, great, but it's the driving force and the motivation and this competition and stepping on others and eat or be eaten, and this type of methodology as a way to manage our lives is what leads to so much disease and sickness and depression and death. So I think I've had great insights here. I'm amazed that other people want to join me on this journey, but I'm also so excited about that, because my dream, back to that, is to be a vessel to share this information through, and to also live it and share the power of living it in this way. And so while I may not have gotten to perfection in 30 days, which is obviously absurd, I have discovered that this is what I want to do. I've learned a lot about the application and importance of what I'm doing, and I'm not just teaching it, it's in me. So if you're spending time watching this, then you can get it too, just by being with me, because we're contagious in vibrational space. And of course, if nobody watches this, I also believe that just by taking it and posting it, that something else happens. And I think that that is so flippin' cool. Just to put it out there does something and makes it more of a real possibility for others. So I have a lesson prepared. I think I'm going to be getting more into combining material in a little bit of an organized format to have a little bit of a lesson to give more substantiality to what I'm speaking about, so that we create with our thoughts and our feelings. I never knew my feelings mattered, because I knew maybe my thoughts, but I didn't realize the connection with feelings. But that's my vibrational point. Like, feelings obviously vibrate. I can pick up on people's feelings when I'm out in the world. I know how they're feeling. So of course that's a vibrational sense. And obviously when you're mad, you can feel the vibration you're putting out. Or when you're happy, obviously extremes make it very obvious. Being in fear, being in deep unworthiness, and same with, being full of joy and feeling freedom. And that's where I'm going, and that's what I want to communicate. But I also want to teach, or I guess it's not even teach. When we ask questions, we're answered. And I want to become sort of a vessel for answers to flow through. I have a lot of questions, so my answers are flowing through this because I'm constantly asking questions. But I have no doubt that you're asking questions too. And hopefully I can grab that inspiration and things come to me. I spend a lot of time reading, I spend a lot of time listening, and I believe that the answers come through that. And I can help communicate that in some way. And even if I'm not now, that's what I'm going to be working towards being, because that's what I really want to be. So you being here is everything to me. This is a co-creative experience. My gain is your gain is my gain. It's a relationship. I'm not just a person putting this on. I'm a very real person communicating with you. I'm in this with you. And this is a co-creative journey. And that really excites me, in case you can't tell. So, and it makes me really happy. So anyway, I'm going to take a shower, and then I'll come back and do a lesson. Have a great Monday.